Good afternoon, and welcome to the Douglas County Racial and Ethnic Disparities, also known as RED Virtual Conference. My name is Theola Cooper, and I am one of the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Subcommittee members. I'd like to give a special thank you to the Separate Juvenile Court of Douglas County, Nebraska, the Honorable Vernon Daniels, CEO and President of the Urban League of Nebraska, Mr. Thomas Warren Sr., and Douglas County Commissioner Chris Rogers. These individuals provide unwavering support for our RED efforts and make our work possible. An additional thank you to the Nebraska Juvenile Justice Association Partnership for making this virtual platform possible. A few housekeeping items before we get started. All participants have been placed on mute. If you have a question for our keynote speaker, please enter it into the chat box. We will be monitoring questions as they come in, and we'll get to as many as time permits after the presentation. For purposes of CEUs, if you are viewing this webinar in a room with others, please make sure to type your name and email address into the chat so that you will receive your certificate. Certificates will be emailed out to participants within the coming week. During the closing remarks, we ask you to please stay on to complete a short survey. Your input on how we can improve is very important to us. Now I will turn it over to Patrick.
All right, thank you, Theola. My name is Patrick Taylor, and I am one of the RED subcommittee members as well. But before I introduce our presenter, we are going to do a quick poll to see who we have with us this afternoon. So I will go ahead and introduce our presenter for today. Nicole Tamayo-Benegas is the SOMS Youth and Family Program Director at Nebraska Urban Indian Health Coalition. She has over 18 years experience providing Native American cultural teachings, substance abuse, and suicide prevention education to American Indian and Native youth, as well as culturally appropriate prevention training to teachers and health providers and community organizations. She has firsthand experience of many challenges that American Indians and Native families face who reside on urban and tribal land, including gang influences, being a teen mother, and have endured many losses contributed to suicide and violence. Being a mother of 5, she recognizes the importance of providing Native youth with culturally based practices and values, community support, and the tools and skills needed to be positive leaders and community members. So with that, without further ado, this is Mrs. Nicole.
Hello. Hello, my name is Nicole Tamayo. I'd like to introduce myself in my language. Hamatakipi, Leonpetuki, Chante, Washte, Napichuzapi, Nicole Tamayo-Benegas, Simachiapik. So this is an introduction that I give you in my language. It means that today, hello, my relatives, I come here with a good and open heart, wanting to be open with what we're discussing, and that all of my intentions are well. My name is Nicole Tamayo-Benegas, like I said. My native name is Wawokia Washdewi, which means good, helpful woman. So today we're going to be discussing the Native culture, understanding and working with a community. So kind of a 101 on the Native culture and how to work with the families that you may come in contact with. Who am I? So I work at Nebraska Urban Indian Health Coalition for the SOMS program, which stands for Soaring Over Meth and Suicide. I am the Youth and Family Program Director there. We focus on substance abuse, suicide prevention primarily. I'm an enrolled member of the Sichangul Lakota, also come from a Hispanic or I prefer Chicana Mexican background. My grandmother was from South Dakota Reservation, from a little village area, Milks Camp, and my grandfather comes from Bordertown, Texas. His family's from Reynosa, Nuevo Leon in Mexico. Like I said, I'm a mother of 5, newly grandmother of 1 this week. And I just identify myself as a community member and supporter in any way I can. I'm going to start with a short video just to kind of get you thinking about some things we'll talk about.
Our people suffer from something. An elderly woman, a full-blood Dakota from where I'm from in Crow Creek. I was with her one time and a lot of bad things were going on. A lot of bad things. And I had asked her, why does this always happen to us? Why do we do these things to each other? Why does it always happen? And she didn't say nothing. She was driving a car for a while. I looked over at her, she was crying. And she said in her language, Ioki Shicha, a deep embedded genetic depression. See, our people at one time, the Dakota people, or all Native Americans, had a very strong connection with the Creator, a very strong connection with Mother Earth, a very strong connection with nature, the forces of nature, all living things on this planet. And all this was taken from us, like that. And we lost this connection with everything that we had. That's where this depression comes from. A lot of our people are severely depressed, and they don't even know it. This depression is just now clinically diagnosed as the same thing soldiers suffer from when they return from combat.
So that video is something that I like to share. We share this with our youth that we work with, and to see the kind of comparison, we talk a lot about the veterans that we know have the PTSD and how that lingers and how they're affected by the things that they go through and see, and how that's played out with their families for generations. And so that's, I think, is an easy way for people to understand how historical intergenerational trauma, for the other people to understand that, and when it's associated to something that you're more familiar than with the Native culture and the things that they've been through. So today we're going to talk about Indigenous and carrying multiple identities, family structures, a little bit about ICWA, and some of the ceremonies, medicine, and how all of these play into barriers in the systems that you are working with. So some of those barriers, guardianship is a big one. We'll talk about family structures, the unwillingness to conduct business in another manner. So the systems have been set up in ways that traditionally were from a European standpoint on how things should look and how they should be ran. And culturally, that's not the same for us. And so being able to be open to actually looking at changing the systems, we can talk about how important that is to change it, knowing that it's not working the way it's been going. But unless we're actually willing to open up and change what we're doing, it's not going to happen. So, and then it's about some of the cultural competency. People just not understanding the Native culture is a big problem, because you're not able to really work with the families if you don't understand where they're coming from, or maybe why they do the things they do. And again, like I said, the historical and intergenerational trauma that we see, and how that continues to play out in the cycles that we continue to see in the juvenile justice systems. So ICWA is a big one. There's so much information with ICWA, but I wanted to share just a little bit. I've given you some resources as well on where you can go to get more information. So a child is eligible for ICWA, which is the Indian Child Welfare Act, through the court systems. The child has to be a member of a federally recognized tribe or eligible to be a member, so they're able to be enrolled in a federally recognized tribe. And then also they would need to be a biological child of a member who is enrolled in a tribe. So there's over 570 different federally recognized tribes in the government now. There are a lot of state tribes that are not federally recognized. And so if they would be members of one of those non-federally recognized tribes, they wouldn't be qualified for ICWA. ICWA is applicable in court hearings involving foster care placement, status offenses, guardianship, termination of parental rights, and adoption, but it does not apply in juvenile law violations or divorce or separation between parents. So when we don't apply ICWA to juvenile law, I have some questions here. It's just how is that really impacting the youth and families that would fall into ICWA if kids are getting put into the system for a criminal law, for a criminal charge. ICWA doesn't apply, but then it's still another way of oppressing and taking the children from the homes that they're supposed to be in. ICWA does have an agreement with the 4 tribes in Nebraska. So the 4 tribes in Nebraska are the Isanti or the Santee Sioux as they're known, the Omaha tribe, Winnebago or Ho-Chunk, and the Poncas. Ponca does not have a reservation here in Nebraska. They have districts, and so they are throughout Nebraska though. They have kinship and tribal affiliation. So emergency placement is one thing that ICWA can come into play with. There are different rules that need to be followed if a child is eligible for ICWA. Nebraska does have ICWA specialists. They have qualified witness specialists that can go to court for the families, for the youth that's involved with the ICWA case. But the problem is that the caseloads that the tribes have that ICWA is involved with or should pertain to, they are so overwhelmed with their own reservations in cases that it's hard for them to step in, especially for the urban settings. For me being enrolled in Rosebud, South Dakota, if ICWA was to come into place, they would have to notify my tribe, and then somebody from there would have to try to take that case, but they don't have enough people to take the cases they have on the reservation or to send them here. So we do have ICWA specialists here, though. They do, these rules do apply. So there's definitely something that needs to be looked into, especially with the rates that we do see youth getting put into the system with welfare cases. A lot of times, if a child or young person is going to be looking at the parental rights being terminated, then this ICWA, if it applies because they are eligible, they cannot if there's a lot more hoops that has to go through and different things set in place. A lot of this is due to the fact that for generations, the government was purposely taking Native youth out of the home, saying that they were unfit because they thought that they would be better placed in non-Native homes. And so this is why ICWA came about. It was revised in 2015, and so a lot of things have changed, and it's really been pushed more in the court system. I have seen still, even in our area, where this ICWA should apply, but a lot of caseworkers still aren't aware of what the ICWA guidelines are or what questions to ask, especially when you look at when cases are open, they a lot of times people are being identified by law enforcement or by a probation officer or somebody, and they're not asking the questions that if the family is enrolled or if ICWA would apply in those cases. So there's still not a good enough push. I've seen families where children were literally getting taken out of the home just in the last 6 months or so, where they were getting taken out of the home. And when the school had contacted me, I asked, do they have a caseworker? And they said yes. And I said, do they know that the kid is Native? Because the kids are Hispanic as well and have Hispanic names. And they said no, they never told them and they never asked. And so we still see our families falling through the cracks when ICWA should be applying to them. So like I said, a lot of them may have Hispanic names. Most of our families, the majority of them, are multicultural, multiracial. We try to work on a lot of the connections. We're trying to work with other community organizations like the Latino Center to talk about what are those connections across the board for our indigenous people, for our Latinos, Hispanic, for our Native, for also the African tribes. There are a lot of different connections across the board when you look at tribal affiliations and kind of thought process and values that they have. And so a big problem that we see with our community and our young people is that they are not they're not aware of what their identity is, what that means to them. They're trying to figure out who they are, but not having the knowledge and the education of their ancestors. And so they also feel like they're really a small group of people and they don't have a lot of people to connect with and where do they fit in. So when we can find those connections across the board, it allows them to have a greater support system. We also look at, many of them do, they have intersectional identities. And so if they identify as LGBTQ, that's just another layer that we have to look at, that how do we best serve those families and people that we're working with. For our families, we have two-spirit people as well. And so that's not the same for as LGBTQ, but they fall into that category because they may be two-spirit and LGBTQ. And two-spirit, there's a whole set of cultural values and responsibilities and purposes that go along with that. So some of the tools that have been used to oppress groups of minorities, one would be the one-drop rule. And so for those that identify as Black or African American, historically, we have seen that they have, if you had one drop of that ancestral background, that automatically made you that group that was less than, that automatically associated you to that. Reversing that, blood quantum requirements have been placed on Natives when reservations came into play and everything. So we are considered sovereign nations, and so technically the government isn't running us. They should be working with us as a kind of our own, like we are our own nation, and they're supposed to be working as a collaboration with us and not telling us and running us how we should be doing things. But Native Americans are the only we're the only group that has to identify a blood quantum to be considered Native. And we still see that coming into play. Tribes are able to set that quantum. Their tribal council is able to reduce that or not. And so you may have a kid that is enrolled in Cherokee that they can literally be 300 something percent, and they are accepted and enrolled in that tribe. For other tribes, it's a fourth of that single tribe. So we have kids who are 60-70% Native with different tribal mixes, but their tribe that they're trying to get enrolled with, or families enrolled with, has a blood quantum on 25%, and so they're ineligible for enrollment. The reason why you will see that is buying into the colonized thought that we have to keep the minimal resources that the tribe has to serve those. So for the Rosewood, for the Sichangos, there's 35,000 plus members. But we see that the blood quantum was set up as a way to still eliminate us as a population and as a group of people. When you have blood quantum set up that way, it reduces the number of actual natives the government would accept as being native. But like I said, the only things or living things that have to identify blood requirements is Native Americans, racing horses, and dogs. And Native Americans are actually listed through the government, like under the Department we're listed with all of the animals, with the national parks and stuff. So we are actually under there, which they kind of did as a way to oppress us as natives, but it also was kind of a backfire on them, because we'd rather pretty much be with the animals and the other people. We say Mutakulayase, meaning we're all related, we're all together. And when we say that, we're not talking human beings. We're talking all of us that are living, breathing. We're talking about the plants and the animals and everything. And so we're fine with being categorized under that kind of department in the government. So family structures, many natives have non-traditional extended families. So most people of European descent would say your brothers, sisters, that household, immediate household members that you would think of is their family. For us, you ask about family, and it's our cousins, our aunties, our uncles. It's somebody that was adopted. It was not even somebody that was adopted legally on papers, especially because we still don't find that as a way to accept something. It doesn't have to be legal through a court system and whatever for us to consider that. So when you look at the family structures with the law and juvenile justice and stuff, the guardianship piece is a big part of it, because we have non-traditional guardianship. We look at our community as a whole as people who are there to take care of that family member. If somebody is kind of lacking where they're not in some mental space or balanced in a good way to take care of a child, then other people step in to help and assist during that time. But we don't usually do that paperwork wise. That's just something that we take on. And so you can see how that affects when it comes in, if the law and the court system comes into play, they don't recognize that person as being somebody who can make decisions for that child unless you have legal documentation to do so. And even for like, people would say your great aunt, your great uncle. For us, we call them grandparents. That's still my grandmother's sister, was not my great aunt. That was my other grandma. And so when you look at even just funerals and things for school, if they're missing in attendance, they say, oh, well, they had 4 grandmas pass away this year. How many grandmothers does this kid have? Well, we have a lot of them, because that's the relationship that we have with them. So like if we have a mother that passes away, our grandmother is another mother to us. Our sisters or our mother's sisters are like other moms to us. And so the connection and the relationship that we have with them is very important, and it's just as a strong relationship. And so people don't understand why you need that same grieving process, why you still need that time to mourn and do that. The Indian Adoption Project ran from 1958 to 1967. And this was purposely, the whole purpose of that adoption project was to place Native children in non-Native homes, because they thought that that was a better way for them to survive and succeed and fit into the environment that they're in. And that literally, my dad was born at the end of that time frame. And so we talk about historical and generational trauma, but even as little as the rights to vote and things like that was my father was the first one in our family, his generation, to be able to born into the fact that you were able to vote and everything, but also to practice our own spiritual ways of being in our own cultural traditions out in the public without that being against the law. So one of the important things about culture for us is our ceremonies. I talked about the adoption a lot. So we have hunka ceremonies, and that is actually how we adopt other family members, how we adopt other children. We don't go through the court systems a lot of the time. We actually go through ceremony and decide that we're going to adopt them into our family. A lot of times that comes out play when maybe somebody loses a son, and then somebody else comes into their life who holds the same attributes of their son that had passed. And so they adopt them. They would choose to adopt them into their family. And say, now you're going to be my son. And that's something that they would talk to the other person's family members and say, is it okay for me to adopt them? I'd like to take them as my son. And then they take on those responsibilities that you would traditionally see with that relationship. Our funerals, many of our families still do 4-day funerals. Like I said, when you look at attendance and truancy, and that's a system point that a lot of our kids are going into this juvenile system is for their school attendance. For our funerals, there's still 4 days. So we literally are together praying, doing ceremonies, taking care of things the way we need to take care of them for 4 days. We don't have, there's a wake in the evening for an hour and a visitation, and then a half an hour ceremony, and you go to the cemetery and you pray a little bit and talk, and then you walk away. Even the part of burying our own, we still dig our own graves. We still, even in town here, will go to the cemetery and we put them in the ground and we put all the dirt, everything on them. And then we have other things that we do while we're there. And there's always a purpose behind those. And so for people not understanding, you're gone for 4 days, it's literally 15-hour days nonstop of feeding the community and taking care of things and spending the last meals and times with our loved one. We still say that, and many tribes across the board believe that for 4 days, they are still with us up until that 4th day. And so we're still spending those last few days and helping them go on their journey. And so these are just small things to really talk about how we as a community still gather together to support each other through those ceremonies and things. We have coming of age ceremonies for males and females specifically. We do Sundance still. We have, which are week-long ceremonies. We do welcoming the Thunder Beings. There's some pictures here of us, and there's a prayer and there's a ceremony, and there's certain ways that we take care of these things. This hike here is in the end of March up in the Black Hills. That is about a 7-mile hike of snow and ice, and there's about a couple feet of snow. And so people don't understand, our kids are taking time off of school to do these things, but we know how important they are for their balance and well-being. We have a saying, which is for us is wolokota, which means having a balance and having peace within yourself and a way of actually being. We do things to not out of the necessity of expecting something back, but that because this is how you are to be, this is how you carry yourself in a good way for your family and for your community to continue to strive and grow together and be strengthened. There's some pictures here from one of our girls' coming of age ceremonies. And so these are practices that are still being done. These were pictures were actually in South Dakota. We have brought this ceremony here to the urban setting because we know we have so many young people who are not going to the reservations, and they don't have these opportunities to understand who they are and why they feel the way they do. And there's a lot of healing that goes in with these ceremonies as well. And then getting back to kind of our own way of thinking and being. We have a lot of medicinal practices and cultural practices that we continue to work on assisting our kids with learning, getting them back to how did we get to where we're at so that we're not continuing those cycles, and really giving them that balance that they need. So a lot of people are familiar with the term smudging. For us, the actual term was aurelia, which means the act of cleansing yourself. So there's many different smudging or azaleas that are done. People do that to put themselves in a good mindset, to kind of let go of some of those hard things that we carry all the time with us. Sweat lodge is another thing that a lot of people are familiar with. The word for us in Lakota is anipi, and that's the structure of the sweat lodge. But the actual ceremony that is an anikagavi, and that is actually cleansing yourself. That is going in there and praying, letting go of those harms and things that you've been having to go through. We still have our community gatherings. Those are times for social. Those are times that we do ceremonies. That's when a lot of times we are giving our namings for our children. We're passing on those traditional ways. For us, like, we go back home. Home is always where your ancestors come from. For me, it's up in Milks Camp in South Dakota. And so we have our annual gathering, and that's a time of recollecting yourself, re-energizing yourself, coming together as a community to kind of let go of and deal with the things that has happened. We break our mourning there. We bring our children into the circle in a good way there. And it's continuing those things that our ancestors have done for centuries, and we lived in a way that kept our balance. We understood that we needed to have a balance holistically. We hear that word all the time now. People talk about what is holistic well-being and practices, and how do we serve the community to really give them that balance. And it's a new term, and they're fairly new within the work field that you see. But for us, that was always a way of being. That was how we kept ourselves centered and grounded. We always understood that. But we were told that wasn't good. We were told we couldn't do those things. We were told that we were savages for doing that way and having that thought process. And now you see medically that you see in the mental health and behavioral health professions, they're seeing how important that is. We're at where we're at today. Our community is where they're at because all of those things were taken from us. Those were forced away from us, and this other way of trying to fit into a society that they thought was more appropriate, and we lost who we were. And so just in the last 40 years have we been able to start practicing our ways in our ceremonies and trying to get back to where we were, having that balance within ourselves. We still are looking at harvesting our traditional plants, and you see a lot of that is coming back too in the community of we need to be able to sustain these things. How do we go back to more healthy ways of providing for ourselves and dealing with health issues that we have? And so this is something that we're trying to bring back in with the programs that we do, taking our kids to harvest the bitter root and the sage and choke cherries, and understanding when is the time to use that, when you can't use that because it could harm you more. But also, if you look at the medicinal and cultural practices, if you're an outsider looking in, you don't understand that, you may not understand what's going on or what that is, and it can be seen in the court system as abuse or neglect. So being culturally aware of what those things are is really important. Another way that I would associate that indigenous and that connection is like there's curanderos, and they are people that did practice traditional healing. Like I said, my grandparents came from, or my great-grandparents, they were from indigenous people in Mexico, and they practiced that way of traditional medicine and salvies and ointments that they would put on things. And so you could look at it and say, oh, well, this is a neglect case. They weren't taking them to the doctor. But if you don't understand that this for centuries has worked for us, and we had our own ways of healing ourselves, if you don't ask those questions, if you are not open to that idea of what does healing look like, what is appropriate, you're not going to really see that maybe that is an abuse or neglect. The pictures here, there are the top pictures, they have scars on them. You can see children, you have some that may have them like on their arms. They have, they look like scars. You could look at them as like neglect or abuse, or somebody was doing something. These are Sundance scars. These are from flesh offerings, from piercing. We do have young people who participate in doing some of this. And so if you're not asking those questions and assumptions are being made, that could open up a whole nother realm. These are some pictures of just the sage and bitterroot and things that are young people, that these are young people who are considered high risk, who may not be going to school, who don't feel like they fit into an education system. It came across a paper not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and it was from one of the kids at an OPS. In the paper, they had came across it in their native program, and then the paper said, "Well, Lakota, aren't I?" And it said, "I'm in I'll never fit in as a Lakota in this in these schools." And so many people think like, "Oh, well, these kids are not coming all the time because they're not being provided for, and nobody cares, they're being neglected, they're not being taken care of." And instead of blaming these families and blaming maybe the environments that they're in, we also have to look at the systems that we have set up and what we're expecting of all of them. We're expecting them to fit into a system that was not created for them. It was a system created for European way of thought and being. It was not a system that was set up to integrate culture and the way of living other areas of our lives. You want to talk about holistic, and education is important in getting them to where they need to be, but it isn't the end all be all. There are so many other things that these kids need, supportive and cultural and mentally, to be able to succeed and thrive in the lives that we have them in. So I've listed some resources here. These are all the native programs in the Omaha area. Nebraska Urban Indian Health, like I said, their Society of Care, Morning Star Counseling. They have native therapists as well. The OPS NICE program, and then the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska, which is out throughout Nebraska, the 4 tribes. So I also have a link. I'm going to be sharing the links in a document with these resources, as well as some other video links that I have here. These are really good ones. They're actual firsthand experiences, a couple of them from residential boarding school, and those, it kind of explains more and gives you a better idea of the things that grandparents have gone through. We have kids who these are their parents, their grandparents directly, who have gone through these boarding school systems, and to better understand that, you can see kind of where we lost who we were, how we got to where we're at, and the substance abuse and everything else that we see in our families and our communities today. And then there's another link at the bottom, what's called We Shall Remain. And I wanted to give you something positive. It talks it's a storyline of the pain and kind of traumas that a young lady sees, but then also it talks about how we are still, we're still being resilient, we're still here, we're still living, we're still fighting against that, and that we have a bright future ahead of us. And I think that is about my time. Are we at time, Patrick?
Not supposed to be here in the first place, so.
Yep, I believe so. If that was, those were excellent words. Thank you for the presentation. I know that brought a lot of awareness, to me as well. I would like to open it up for any questions for Nicole at this time. From anyone in the audience, if they would like to ask a question to Nicole.
If it just headed back to the
While we're looking for questions, I'm checking the chat here. You said some great points, about just even knowing what questions to ask, Nicole. I mean, there's so many Hispanic families that you're absolutely correct that probably could be considered Native, and there's probably a lot of Black people that if they don't know, they probably could be considered Native. And
wow, and that's a big part. I've had community programs who have said, we've never served any Native families or Native kids. And I said, do you have any Black families? Like, how much percent? Oh, 60%. I'm like, then you have Native families.
Yeah.
The most current homicide with the Loyal that just happened this weekend, he's Native, but most people look at him and not know that.
Yeah.
But his family's he's actually the older brother, but his younger siblings and his mom are very active in the Native community. They dance, they've been around here forever. But that's really, I mean, when you look at the data and things that are collected, that's my biggest thing, is that when we say, multiracial, you cannot serve people the way they need to be served if you don't know what that means, if you don't know what that includes.
Yep. Well, I agree 100%. Here is a question, and this is from LaDonna. What is the smudging process? So if you could explain what the smudging process is.
So a lot of people are most familiar with sage, but the tribes here, they all use either, you'll see sage, sweetgrass, or flat cedar. And it's actually, usually they use an abalone shell. The abalone shell, so water is one of the four most important things for us. And so that's the representation of the water with it. You'll burn a little bit of one of those plants. Tobacco was the fourth plant that is used around here for praying and stuff. So part of the smudging is really a kind of a cleansing, but a big part you can see across religions, and I hate to say religions, but it brings up the point that many people will say, do you have a religious background? And most natives will say, if they culturally practice, no, because it's not religion for us, it's a spirituality and just practices and things that we do. But part of that is you burn that, you do your prayers, and when we burn things, just like you have in the churches and stuff, they have candles and things. Part of that idea process is the smoke and stuff is taking your prayers and thoughts and stuff up to the Creator.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. We have another question here, Nicole. What is the purpose of scarification? And I'm assuming, the rituals of the scarring.
That was on the picture.
Yep.
Yeah. So most people are familiar with Sundance, like the pictures you see online. They have the tree and they'll have them kind of hanging with ropes to the tree. So that's actually piercing, is when they do go through Sundance ceremony, they actually are pierced. But that's a sacrification of your own self. And like I said, you'll do flesh offerings. All we have is literally our own being in person. Everything else, we don't have actual possession over or anything. And so when we're giving of ourselves, we're praying for our families, for our community, and certain people. And so that's giving what we actually own and have to them.
Okay. That makes sense. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to scroll to see the next question here. So many people are thanking you, Nicole, for just making them more aware about even asking those questions, because it's so important.
I think that's a big piece, is that I tell people, we try not to offend people, but then we make assumptions, and just being open to the fact, being real honest, I don't know, and so can I ask you? And some things we don't want to share. There's certain ceremony things, certain practices that you can't explain entirely, but you can give them an idea of why it is or what the purpose is.
No, absolutely makes sense. Here's one other question. How does child welfare get help for the children who do not qualify by blood quantum?
So like I said, it depends on which tribe that they would be affiliated with, because some of them, all you have to do is prove lineage, that you have somebody that's like, that has been enrolled, whether it was way back when they started the rolls. So it depends. For one, like you want to find out what the tribal affiliation is. If you have kids that are in foster or that are being adopted, the biggest part is to try to find out what that tribe looks like, what that tribe would be, if they would be eligible or not, and if you can get them enrolled. But if not, is connecting them to the community resources that are able to give that cultural piece is the biggest part of it too, I think.
Okay. And I think Judith, she had a question. I think it was just an overall question. You know, is it possible for them to get enrolled? And I hope I'm reading this right, Judith. I think she just wants to know how. You know, how do they get enrolled? You know, once.
So I know that was something we talked about. So like I said, there's over 570 federally recognized tribes. They all have their own enrollment process. They have their own. They all have their own tribal governments. They have their own paperwork. They put their own requirements on it. So at the center, we've collected as people have requested assistance. So we've got 20 plus applications on file at Nebraska Urban. And then we try to find out what are those requirements, but it literally is going to be a case-by-case basis in figuring out what that looks like.
Okay. And then Brian has a question. How would you recommend we address families that are Native but do not want any ICWA involvement, however, could benefit from the ICWA resources?
I would say and it's very likely we have families that do not do the cultural piece, don't have an understanding of it. And that's another assumption to not make, is that they want to have that cultural connection to it. But ICWA being involved is not, I would say is never a bad thing, because then you have those resources. It doesn't mean at any point, because ICWA could step in and say, no, like we can't terminate these rights. But at any point, a mother could, or a parent could decide to terminate rights and say no, that they're going over like that ICWA piece. But it does give the other parents like opportunity to have other things apply. So I mean, it's always a win situation. You can always pull back and decide to terminate your own rights on your own, and ICWA can't override that or anything. So I think it's always a good thing to have.
Okay. That makes sense. Let me know if there's any other questions. That looks like that was the last question. I hope I didn't miss anything. And I definitely know, again, those are great questions. I know I learned a lot, and I'm going to be asking questions a whole lot more, and definitely will be reaching out to you, if I have any questions, Nicole, as I know, some of the other participants will be trying to do the same thing. So I think with that, we will move on to a short survey, I believe, if that is correct, Christy, and then we'll have some closing remarks by Deborah.
Patrick, can I just
Yeah.
For one, I just wanted to say thank you guys for thinking it's important enough to have these conversations. I think we've been left out of those kind of minority groups for quite a while, and so I think the biggest thing is like remembering that we're still here, and that it's not a stereotypical, oh, you can tell who's Native and who isn't. But also just really, if you think you have somebody, ask the question. I mean, ask it anyways. It doesn't hurt to ask anybody. And then really reach out to those people who can assist you to figure out what else you can help the families with. But
yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Great words. I know I'm personally going to make more of an effort myself. So, and I know, that's really the whole point, racial and ethnic disparities. How do we, learn each other's cultures and idiosyncrasies, to better serve the community as a whole, and you guys absolutely have, been left out of the conversation. And, I agree with you. Bringing you guys into the conversation can only benefit everyone, so thank you so much. And again, that survey should be coming up here pretty quick. Yep, there it is. And I will allow Deborah to give our closing remarks after the survey.
Thanks so much, Patrick. And thank you, Nicole. That was a wonderful presentation, very informative. Quick reminder, survey has popped up. Please take a moment to complete it. It really does help us make these trainings better. Again, thank you, Nicole, for being with us today. The information you have shared will certainly assist us in building rapport with and gaining deeper understanding of our Indigenous populations. We truly appreciate everyone taking the time to meet with us today. Don't forget to join us again next month when we will hear from Rosie Tu with Heartland Family Service. Tell us a bit about refugee populations to help us to serve better. Sign up through the NJJ app, or you can email Shelley Salter at michelle.salter@nebraska.gov, and she can assist with sign up. Or any of the members on here today, myself or Theola or Patrick, can assist with that. Thank you all for joining, and have a great rest of your week.